What's up, everyone? Join me for another episode of OnDotNet. This time I have scottaddie to talk to us about Azure App Configuration, feature flags, and security with Key Vault and Azure Identity. Don't miss this one. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of OnDotNet. Today, I have my very good friend, scottaddie, once again to talk to us about Azure App Configuration and how that relates to .NET developers and security and all that goodness. How are you doing, Scott?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on the show again, Christos. Figured you wouldn't want me back after the last shoot, but good to be back.
We can't get enough of you, my friend. That's the problem here. So it's nice to have you back. Now, by the way, you've changed teams, right? So if I remember correctly, you went from your previous team to a new exciting team. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's correct. So I was on the ASP.NET Core content team, creating all kinds of Learn modules, docs, videos that centered around ASP.NET Core and Azure. I've since transitioned over to the Azure SDK team as a PM. One of my areas of focus over there is .NET, which brings me back to this show.
I love it. The Azure SDK is my favorite team, but don't tell that to anyone, right? Okay, glad to see you there. So you said you want to talk about the Azure App Configuration and why this is such an important feature for people that want to run Azure Web Apps and .NET apps, right?
Yeah, so let's start with that.
Okay.
So Azure App Config or Azure App Configuration is the proper name. What is it? Why would you care? Well, as a .NET developer, you're probably responsible for distributed applications. Microservices are just one example of that application type. In a scenario like that, it might be desirable for your team to centralize all of your application configuration in one place, one store, instead of shipping that with the application, say in your app settings.json files. So what you can do then is move that configuration from your app settings JSON files out to this Azure App Configuration service. This service is interesting in that it's complementary to services like Azure Key Vault, where you could also store configuration. And in fact, Azure App Configuration and Azure Key Vault can be integrated together. We'll see later on in the show, I have a demo of how that'll work. One other thing I'd like to talk about in this show is the concept of feature flags or feature toggles, whatever you want to call them, and how Azure App Configuration can be used to support those feature flags. So we'll touch on that. And much like beer and cheese or wine and cheese, Azure App Configuration pairs extremely well with other things like Key Vault, as we mentioned, but also Microsoft's feature management library. So we'll take a look at that as well. Nice.
Now, I have a question. You mentioned Azure quite a bit. Is there a local developer story that we can use? Because if I need to use the Azure App Config for getting and storing all my properties for my app, how would that work in a local development scenario?
Yeah, great question. So unfortunately, there isn't an emulator for the local development experience. You would need to connect to Azure for this.
Right. Like Azure Key Vault.
Correct.
You need to be connected, right?
One thing I will show, though, is the often ignored local development experience with regards to authentication. So how does Azure Identity work, say, in Visual Studio, if you want to use your local development account or your Azure account to connect to that service?
Awesome. Show us then.
Cool.
All yours.
So let's flip over to Visual Studio. So what I have here in Visual Studio is an ASP.NET Core 5.0 Blazor Server application. The things I'm going to show you here could also be adapted to an MVC application or Razor Pages application with slightly different syntax here and there in the Razor CSHTML file.
So anything that runs on top of the ASP.NET Core, in other words, or ASP.NET,
That's
right?
correct.
Perfect.
Well,
gRPC.
I call out Blazor Server specifically because if you wanted to do what I'm going to show today with Blazor WebAssembly, Blazor WASM, you would have to take a slightly different approach. So let's start with what we have here in the project file, and I want to just talk through the dependencies that I'm pulling in to make all of this happen. Really what you're going to need to do this is what you see on line 10 and 11, those two NuGet packages, and then the package on line 13. So let's talk through what those things are. What you see on line 10 is the Azure.Identity NuGet package that is shipped by the Azure SDK team. And this is the client library that you're going to use as a .NET developer to interact with Azure Identity.
Mm-hmm.
The things like the default Azure credential that we'll talk through come from here. Then if we look at the next package down, the Microsoft Azure App Configuration and ASP.NET Core package, really all that you need to know about this is where the configuration provider is coming from that we will need to wire up to Azure App Config. And then finally on line 13, that's that generic Microsoft feature management library that I mentioned. It's not coupled at all to Azure App Configuration.
Right.
We're going to use it for the feature toggle functionality that we'll be adding.
Sweet.
So let me first run this application, and I will show everyone what we have. We should hit a breakpoint here, and there's a reason for that. So in any ASP.NET Core application, you're going to have your program CS file. Inside of there, you will have this create host builder method. I have a breakpoint set here because I wanted to demonstrate something very important. What you want to do to integrate with Azure App Config is to add the configuration provider. The way you do that is you add this configure app configuration method. The name's sort of confusing, but configure app configuration has nothing to do with Azure App Configuration.
Okay.
Which is why I have a breakpoint here. This is simply your opportunity as a .NET developer to add configuration providers.
Okay.
Out of the box, we already have some added for us. You can see here in my watch window, zoom in a little bit, I have 5 configuration sources that are registered here. So if I zoom back out, step over this line, notice this count has incremented to 6.
Yes.
The very last item in there you're going to see is the Azure App Configuration provider. That's what's enabling us to reach out through the configuration API and fetch values from that centralized configuration store. Now, if I let this run through, we'll see what this app is actually doing. This is my Contoso lending application. If you watched the Key Vault recording I did with Christos, this should look very, very familiar to you. So we have very simple UI. We have we can get quotes for stocks or the latest cryptocurrency.
I was going to say, does it support crypto? Because it's all the rage these days, right?
Yep. If you don't have Doge, you're not hip, right? So to the moon with Doge.
To the moon with my $5 in Doge.
Apparently not right now. So we're down almost 7%. So to get this quote, I had to fetch an API key from Key Vault. This is where Key Vault comes into play, and the reason why I want to integrate Key Vault with Azure App Configuration. Something else I will point out at this page here is you might say, well, maybe I want to do some A/B testing with this cryptocurrency page. We're not quite sure if it's ready for prime time. This is where the feature toggles will be useful. The ability to turn that page on and off in production as needed. So if I go back over to, flip over to my Azure portal. So this is my app configuration resource that I've already provisioned, and show you a couple of things. So in Visual Studio, I was connecting up to this resource. And as I mentioned, we're going to focus on the local development experience and how you make that possible.
Right.
You go up to this access control blade in the portal. One of the things you're going to want to do is go to this role assignments tab. And you can add, actually you can see it from here. You want to assign your user account access to this app configuration data reader role.
Very nice.
That will allow you to fetch anything you want from app configuration while you're stepping through the code in Visual Studio.
So read-only permissions to these things. So that account can only read, cannot write, which is great because it's managed by RBAC. And then I think you're using Azure Identity to authenticate to this service, and therefore, did I steal your thunder there? To
Correct.
not have to configure, because I see an access key, but we don't want to use access keys to access the service, right? We want to do it secretless, no passwords, no keys in our application. So
correct. Yep. Good point. So if we go over to our overview blade, here is the endpoint that we will use to connect to this resource.
Right.
I go over to Visual Studio now and look at that code and how that's working. Stop the app for a minute here. I have an extension method I have created, and I'm passing into that extension method that endpoint that I just showed you in the Azure portal. It's defined as an environment variable.
Right.
If I step into that then, really the meat of it is right here on line 19. This is where I'm saying I'm going to register the Azure App Config configuration provider in .NET. I'm going to connect to that resource by passing the endpoint. And if this looks odd to you, this is a C#9 feature.
Right.
New,
nice.
Not URI. I'm passing along the credential. So to your point, Christos, here's where this is being wired up. I'm using the default Azure Credential class that comes out of that Azure.Identity NuGet package. This is really a credential chain behind the scenes. Default Azure Credential will attempt multiple credential types in a particular order.
Okay.
One of those types it will attempt to use is the Visual Studio credential. So you'll notice up here in the corner, I'm actually signed in to Visual Studio with my user account,
right?
Azure user account. Therefore, that is the account that will be used to authenticate up to Azure.
I see. So if that account needs to have access to the resource, otherwise the credential class will fail. The default Azure credential will fail because your account does not have access.
Correct.
Nice.
So when I showed off the access control blade in Azure portal, it was this account here that I'm signed into Visual Studio with that I gave data reader access so that I could access the configuration store.
Cool.
Very next thing I'm doing here is I'm saying, well, I also want to use Key Vault with this. And so I'm calling this .configure Key Vault method and passing along that same default Azure credential object here. So that will flow into Key Vault and handle authentication.
Right.
If we then go back to the Azure portal, let's take a look at where we would define configuration settings.
Right.
So up here, I've got two Key Vault keys defined, which you can tell by the icon that appears to the left.
Oh, nice.
If you ever wanted to add a Key Vault reference, again, these keys are defined in Key Vault, not here. These are just references.
Oh, references, nice.
And choose Key Vault reference.
Oh, sweet. Now, quick question. It's always safe to store your credentials in Key Vault, but are the properties here encrypted or secure in any way? Or is that why we need to use Key Vault when we add configuration settings?
Yeah, so there is configuration, there is encryption support in app configuration.
Yep.
So data in transit and at rest in app configuration is encrypted.
Right.
The value of Key Vault here is your encryption possibilities are far greater.
Yeah, and there's also auditing, right?
Yeah,
I mean, with Key Vault, you get auditing, so you know who accessed what, whereas with this one, you won't be able to, even though the properties are secured, you can't see who's reading these. So that's the important difference here.
Correct. So app configuration and Key Vault are meant to be complementary services, and this is how you would integrate those two together.
I see. So another question I have, sorry for throwing this to you, but what happens when I have multiple environments? So I have a dev environment and I have a production environment. Do we need to use two different app configuration resources for that? Is that the best practice?
The best practice is to use a separate resource per environment. However, there's nothing preventing you from using the same resource across all environments.
It might be the fact that you might want to reference to different key vaults, though, right? So that will make things complicated. I see.
Yeah.
Okay, different ways to architect this one depending on your needs. But you can have one that can be used by many, or you can have an individual one that is used by individual environments.
Correct.
Cool.
The other thing we have here on this screen is it's actually this first row here, this crypto thing. You look to the left of that, and there's a different icon. It's a purple toggle button.
Yes.
This is a feature flag that I have defined in Azure App Config. So you might wonder now, where do you define those in Azure App Config? It's actually the next blade down, feature manager. So here, I've got this crypto feature flag that I've defined.
Right.
Again, you can add feature flags here by clicking the add button and completing this form.
Okay.
I've already got one defined. You can see it's enabled, which is why that crypto page appeared in the menu on the left of my application.
Right.
Now, if I run this application, let's see if we can disable that crypto page.
Yes.
From the Azure portal. I'll show you how that works.
Wait, you mean while the application is running, you can do this live in real time?
Yep. So let's say I go out to this crypto page.
Yep.
And go get my quote. And okay, I see my Dogecoin is really taking a beating now.
Man, I'm losing so much money. What are you doing to me, Scott, this morning?
Yeah, we'll pretend we didn't see that. So now I can go out to my feature manager page, and I will disable this simply by clicking that.
Okay.
Go back over to my application, refresh, page unavailable.
Nice. So how are we monitoring for feature flags? Like what is prompting this change in real time to our application?
I'm glad you asked. All right, so let's go over.
It's not been scripted, people. This is all live. I'm telling you.
Nothing is scripted.
Nothing is scripted.
So over here, I've got my Razor component that is used for that crypto page we were looking at.
Right.
This is where that Microsoft Feature Management Library comes into play.
Oh,
so
I see.
Up here on line 7, I'm injecting through this inject directive an instance of iFeature Manager. The reason why I'm doing that is iFeature Manager provides this capability where you can go out to Azure App Configuration. So here on line 74, and determine whether a flag is enabled or disabled. It'll return the state of that flag.
Right.
So what I'm doing here, I didn't want to hard code the crypto string.
Yep.
So I'm using the C# name of feature. And you can see it's just going to check, is that crypto flag enabled or not? So
the flag is an enum that you set up in your application?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. So over here, all that I've done is I've created a flags enum.
Yes.
And the reason why I did this is I didn't, again, want to hard code the crypto string.
Yeah. Love it.
So this will return true, false. And essentially what's going on here is it will create a quote object to go out and get a quote for Dogecoin in this case.
Yeah.
If that feature flag is enabled. If the feature flag is disabled, don't even bother hydrating this crypto quote object.
Very nice.
Where the magic happens is up here. So this handle valid submit method is invoked when that get quote button is clicked on the form.
Okay.
It will then go out to a quote service I've built to pull back a quote for whatever crypto I've decided to get a quote for.
Yep.
This is where Key Vault would be used. And again, why the two are integrated together. The magic, and I'm going to point this out because there's a lot of discussion about how to do this that I've seen on various forums. In Blazor Server, if you wanted to toggle pieces of UI based on whether the flag is enabled or disabled, it's really just as simple as including a conditional statement. So if crypto enabled, this is the Boolean that is returned from the feature manager check, then display the quote form.
Nice.
Otherwise, say the page is unavailable.
Yep.
So that's how it's all working. A couple of pieces that I'll end with here that are critical to getting this working are over here in startup, your startup CS file. You're going to have a configure services method.
Right.
A couple of things you need to do here. So on line 35, you need to call this add Azure App Configuration method. This will register that configuration refresh provider
Right.
as a singleton inside of the service collection here in this
So we
app.
can inject it and use it in other pages, right?
Correct.
Yep.
So it'll add it to the IOC container as a singleton. Line 36 here then will add that feature manager interface as a singleton, again, in the service collection.
Yep.
This line 36 is part of that Microsoft feature management library.
Right.
It is essential we use this so that over here in our Razor component, we can do what we see here on line 7. So without that that call in startup CS, add feature management, we would not be able to inject this feature manager because it wouldn't be registered in the IOC container.
I like it.
Final thing you would have to do to get this demo working that I've shown here is in your configure method of startup CS, you're going to call this use Azure App Configuration method. And that's simply going to register the middleware that's required to use Azure App Config in this application.
Cool.
So that is, in a nutshell, how you would get all of this working. Again, if we were to fire up our app for one last time and go through this breakpoint, go back up to the Azure portal, and you'll see it's still disabled.
Yep.
Wait for our page to come up. And because it's disabled, we don't have the crypto page. So now if I go back out, just to show this is not magic.
Well, it works as well as magic, right?
Yeah, it works as well as magic. Refresh, boom, our crypto.
Damn, nice.
See?
Got it.
And you can see, step over this line, sure enough, we're getting true back. So the feature management library is indeed communicating with Azure App Configuration's feature management capabilities.
Right.
That is my demo.
That is a lovely demo. Fantastic. Oh, there was a lot of packed information in there. Azure App Configuration, feature toggling or feature flags, and then all that secured with Azure Key Vault and Microsoft Identity and the Azure SDKs. I mean, this doesn't get better than that. And I wish this service was available to me when I was working in the industry, and I could, build some fantastic applications that don't take hours to do feature flags and updating web configs and restarting applications. Man, those were the days. Right. Scott, thank you so much for coming and educating us today with this. I hope everyone learned something new today, especially it was definitely new for me, the Azure App Service, the app configuration service. I haven't used it before, so I'm definitely going to start looking at that and seeing the end-to-end security from developer to production. It's also fantastic. So thank you.
Thank you, Christos.